There are places in the world where the air itself seems to hum with secrets, where the weight of centuries presses down upon stone and parchment, guarding truths too potent for the uninitiated. The Vatican, an ancient fortress of faith and power, stands as one such place. A labyrinth of corridors, both physical and metaphysical, where the past is not merely recorded, but carefully curated, its most dangerous revelations locked away behind vaults of doctrine and dogma. Yet what if some of those vaults have cracked open? What if, through the silent rebellion of time, or the daring of unseen hands, fragments of forbidden knowledge have slipped into the light? The idea of the Vatican's forbidden text that could rewrite human history is not merely an exercise in conspiracy or intrigue. It is an invitation to consider that the story we have been told about ourselves, about the origins of faith, the nature of divinity, even the trajectory of civilization, might be a palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean and rewritten, with only faint traces of the original script bleeding through. Imagine for a moment that history is not a straight road, but a vast, branching river, its currents shaped by the hands of those who control the narratives. The Vatican, as the oldest continuous seat of spiritual and political authority in the Western world, has long been the keeper of certain narratives, the arbiter of what is sacred and what is heresy. But heresy, in its oldest sense, is simply a matter of choice, a deviation from the sanctioned path. And sometimes it is the heretics who carry the torch of truth into the dark. The notion of suppressed texts is not new. From the Gnostic Gospels excluded from the biblical canon to the whispered accounts of lost civilizations, there has always been a shadow library running parallel to the official one. These are the books that speak of Christ who did not die on the cross, of wisdom traditions older than Rome, of technologies and cosmologies that defy the linear march of progress we have been taught to accept. They are dangerous not because they are false, but because they threaten to unravel the very fabric of institutional authority. Consider the weight of a single parchment, its ink faded, but its message undimmed. What if it speaks of a Jesus who was not a solitary Messiah, but one among many enlightened teachers, his message stripped of its revolutionary edges? What if it describes a time before the flood, when empires rose with knowledge we can scarcely comprehend? These are not idle speculations. They are the echoes of a past that has been systematically erased, not by accident, but by design. To engage with these forbidden texts is to step into a hall of mirrors, where every reflection distorts and reveals in equal measure. It is to recognize that history is not a fixed monument, but a living, breathing entity, shaped as much by what is omitted as by what is included. The Vatican, in its role as guardian, has also been a censor, not out of malice perhaps, but out of the understanding that some truths are too volatile for the masses. Yet in an age of leaks and digital whispers, the walls between the sanctioned and the suppressed grow thinner by the day. This is not merely about religion or archaeology, it is about the architecture of human understanding. If the foundations of our collective story are built upon omissions, then what does that say about the world we inhabit? The forbidden texts are more than historical curiosities. They are the missing threads in a tapestry that, once rewoven, could alter our perception of everything from science to spirituality. So let us begin this journey not as skeptics or blind believers, but as explorers standing at the threshold of a hidden chamber. The air here is thick with the scent of old ink and older secrets. The light is dim, but it is enough. To speak of the Vatican's forbidden texts is to speak of more than mere documents. It is to engage with the very scaffolding of reality as we know it. These texts are not simply banned because they contradict doctrine. They are suppressed because they unravel the carefully constructed mythos that has governed the Western world for centuries. Within their pages lie three core themes, each a seismic fault line running beneath the foundations of history: the nature of divinity, the rewriting of human origins, and the lost sciences of antiquity. At the heart of the forbidden archives lies a question that has haunted theologians and heretics alike. What if God is not what we were told? The canonical Bible presents a singular, monolithic narrative, a linear story of creation, fall, and redemption. But the apocryphal texts, those deemed too dangerous for inclusion, paint a far more complex portrait. The Gnostic Gospels, for example, speak of a divine realm not ruled by a single paternal deity, but populated by emanations, eons, and a flawed demiurge who fashioned this material world as a prison for the soul. Christ in these texts is not a sacrificial lamb, but a revealer of gnosis, a liberator who awakens humanity to its own divine spark. This is not merely a theological divergence, it is a tectonic shift in the understanding of power. If God is not a distant king, but an immanent force within all beings, then the entire hierarchy of church authority trembles. The Vatican, as the self-proclaimed intermediary between heaven and earth, cannot afford such a revelation. And so the texts that whisper of a more mystical, decentralized spirituality are locked away, deemed heretical not because they are false, but because they dissolve the need for an institutional gatekeeper. Beyond theology, the forbidden archives allegedly contain traces of a past far older and stranger than the one taught in schools. Fragments of the Book of Enoch, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and other esoteric works speak of antediluvian empires, of Atlantis, Hyperborea, and cultures wielding knowledge that blurred the line between science and magic. These are not the fantasies of fringe historians, but echoes of a tradition preserved in secret societies, hermetic orders, and the vaults of the Vatican itself. What if the Great Flood was not a divine reset, but a cataclysm that erased an advanced civilization? What if the pyramids, the megaliths, and the inexplicable precision of ancient architecture are not monuments to primitive ingenuity, but remnants of a lost science? The implications are staggering. It would mean that human history is not a steady ascent from ignorance, but a cycle of forgetting and rediscovery, a notion that dismantles the modern myth of progress. The Church, as the inheritor of Rome's imperial legacy, has a vested interest in maintaining the narrative of a world reborn through Christianity. To acknowledge a grander, older truth would be to admit that the roots of wisdom extend beyond the reach of papal authority. Perhaps the most explosive theme within the suppressed texts is the suggestion that ancient cultures possess sciences that we are only now, in the modern era, beginning to rediscover. Alchemical manuscripts, geometric codes hidden in sacred art, and cryptic references to the fire from the gods all point to a forgotten understanding of energy, matter, and consciousness. The Vatican, some researchers claim, has long been aware of these secrets, not as superstition, but as a suppressed technology. Consider the legend of the Hermetica, the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, which speak of as above, so below, a principle that would later resurface in quantum physics. Or the rumors of Vatican scholars studying the Akashic records, a metaphysical database of all human experience. These are not mere curiosities. They are the remnants of a time when science and spirituality were not at odds but intertwined. The Church's suppression of such ideas was not just about maintaining doctrinal purity, it was about controlling the direction of human evolution. To allow the masses access to the idea that matter could be transformed, that consciousness could shape reality, would be to unleash a power too great for any institution to contain. The forbidden texts are not relics of a dead past. They are mirrors held up to our present. In an age where information is both weaponized and commodified, the question of who controls history is more urgent than ever. The Vatican's hidden archives symbolize a larger truth, that knowledge is never neutral, that every civilization has its shadow library, its unspoken narratives. To engage with these themes is not to indulge in conspiracy, but to recognize that history is a battleground of narratives, and the victors have always been the ones who control the story. The forbidden texts remind us that there are other ways of seeing, other paths of understanding, paths that might lead us not just to a revised past, but to a reimagined future. History is not merely a record, it is a living story, a mythic tapestry where truth and symbol intertwine. The forbidden texts of the Vatican are no exception. They do not simply contain secrets, they are secrets, encoded in allegory, veiled in parable, whispering truths too potent for direct speech. To understand them, we must read them as the ancients did, not with the sterile lens of modern skepticism, but with the eyes of poets and mystics, for whom every word was a mirror and every line a doorway. Among the most haunting of the suppressed texts is the Gnostic Sophia of Jesus Christ, a revelation that casts not Christ, but Sophia, wisdom herself, as the central figure of redemption. In this narrative, Sophia is not merely an abstract virtue, but a divine emanation who, in her yearning to know the unknowable God, plunges into the chaos of creation. From her longing, from her error, the material world is born, a world ruled not by the true God, but by the demiurge, a lesser, jealous deity who claims to be the only God. This is more than myth. It is a radical subversion of orthodoxy. The demiurge in this telling is the God of the Old Testament, wrathful, possessive, demanding obedience. Sophia, the exiled goddess, becomes the hidden guide who leads humanity back to the true, ineffable light. The parallels to our own world are unmistakable. How often has institutional power masqueraded as divine authority? How often has wisdom been branded as heresy? The Vatican's suppression of this text is no accident. It is the silencing of a story that would make every priest and pope an intermediary to a false god. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria is often framed as a tragedy of lost knowledge. But what if it was also a ritual, a symbolic act that would echo through the centuries? The library was not merely a repository of scrolls. It was the living memory of the ancient world, holding Egyptian, Greek, Persian, and Indian wisdom under one roof. Its burning was the first great act of cultural amnesia, a warning of what happens when too much knowledge is concentrated in one place. The Vatican's archives are the modern Alexandrian library, not because they burn knowledge, but because they bury it. The forbidden texts are the unburned scrolls, the ones that survive by being hidden rather than destroyed. Their survival is a testament to the resilience of truth, but their concealment is a reminder that the same forces that set flame to Alexandria still shape our world today. The lesson is clear. Knowledge must be decentralized, or it will be controlled. Imagine a young scholar in the vaults beneath the Vatican, candle in hand, trembling as he unrolls a manuscript older than Christendom itself. The words speak of a time when humanity walked with gods, when the veil between worlds was thin. But as he reads, he feels the weight of eyes upon him. Not just the eyes of the church's guardians, but the gaze of something older, something that watches from beyond history. This is the true drama of the forbidden texts. They are not passive objects, but active agents in a hidden war. Every initiate who discovers them faces a choice: to bow to the authority that guards them, or to become a heretic, a smuggler of truths. The church in this light is not merely an oppressor, but a reluctant custodian, tasked with keeping secrets too dangerous for the unprepared. But who decides who is ready? And what happens when the secrets outgrow their keepers? These narratives are not artifacts. They are alive, playing out in our world in ways both subtle and staggering. The struggle between Sophia and the demiurge mirrors the battle between decentralized knowledge and centralized control, between the internet's promise of free information and the algorithms that curate what we see. The burning of Alexandria repeats in the deletion of archives, the silencing of dissent, the rewriting of history in real time. To engage with these deeper narratives is to realize that the forbidden texts are not about the past. They are about now. They are the dreams of history, rising up to haunt a world that has tried to forget them. The forbidden texts of the Vatican are not relics to be pondered in isolation. They are living ideas, and like all potent ideas, they demand action. To encounter them is to stand at a crossroads. One path leads back to the comfort of accepted narratives, the other into uncharted territory where history, science, and spirituality must be renegotiated. But what does this mean for the way we live, the way we think, the way we shape our world? Every dominant civilization rests upon a foundational myth, a narrative so deeply woven into the fabric of collective consciousness that it becomes invisible, as pervasive and unexamined as the air we breathe. For the Western world, this myth manifests as a trinity of assumptions: the inevitability of linear progress, the sanctity of institutional authority, and the rigid separation of the sacred from the secular. The forbidden texts hidden within the Vatican's vaults challenge each of these pillars, not through blunt contradiction, but by revealing the seams where reality has been stitched together by selective storytelling. To truly engage with these suppressed revelations is to undergo a fundamental shift in our relationship with knowledge itself. It demands that we read history not as passive students memorizing approved narratives, but as detectives examining a crime scene where evidence has been tampered with. What if the so-called Dark Ages were not an era of ignorance, but a period of deliberate obscuration? What if the Renaissance was less a rebirth of forgotten wisdom than a calculated redistribution of it? A reshuffling of intellectual authority rather than its liberation? These questions are not idle speculation. They are the first tremors of a paradigm cracking under the weight of its own omissions. Similarly, science must be liberated from its dogmatic slumber and recognized as what it has always been, an evolving dialogue between the known and the unknowable. Modern physics, with its quantum entanglements that mirror the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, in neurobiology's growing acknowledgement of meditative states as legitimate fields of study, are not breakthroughs so much as homecomings. A return to insights that ancient traditions preserved while the institutionalized world dismissed them as superstition. The wall between objective science and subjective spirituality is not being breached. It is being revealed as an illusion, a false dichotomy erected to serve systems of control. At its core, true spirituality has always been a subversive force. The moment direct gnosis, unmediated knowledge of the divine, is acknowledged as possible, the entire edifice of religious intermediation crumbles. This is why mystics from Meister Eckhart to Giordano Bruno have been persecuted, not because their experiences were false, but because they were too democratizing. If God can be known without priests, without sacraments, without the sanctioned rituals of any church, then the gatekeepers of transcendence become obsolete. The forbidden text whisper of sciences that once flourished in the shadows of official history, technologies of sound, stone, and consciousness that defy modern categorization. Today, on the fringes of accepted research, experimenters are rediscovering what the builders of the Great Pyramids and Gothic cathedrals seemingly understood: that frequency and form can alter matter, that intention might reshape reality, that the megaliths dotting the globe are not primitive monuments but sophisticated devices whose purpose we have forgotten. This is not a rejection of modernity, but an expansion of its possibilities, an acknowledgement that some knowledge may have been suppressed not because it was incorrect, but because it was too empowering for the general populace. The Vatican's locked archives are but one theater in an eternal struggle over who gets to define reality. In our digital age, this battle takes new forms. The algorithmic suppression of controversial research, the academic ostracization of heterodox theories, the geopolitical weaponization of historical narratives. To engage with the forbidden text is to recognize that history is not a neutral record, but an ongoing argument, and to choose consciously which side of that argument we will amplify. It is to become stewards of intellectual sovereignty, preserving what institutions would discard and challenging what they would enforce. Ultimately, these texts demand more than intellectual assent. They require a transformation in how we live. If humanity's past is vaster and stranger than we've been taught, then education becomes an act of rebellion, a deliberate seeking out of suppressed books and marginalized voices. Spirituality becomes a direct encounter, unmediated by any authority. Community becomes a sanctuary where truth is not handed down, but built collectively. The forbidden texts were hidden because they do not merely inform, they transmute. And it is this alchemy, the turning of leaden dogma into golden understanding, that has always been the real heresy and the only hope. We stand at the precipice of revelation, where centuries of suppressed whispers now bleed into modern consciousness like ink spreading through water. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The Vatican's hidden texts are not mere historical curiosities. They are fissures in the carefully constructed facade of authorized history, cracks through which pours a light so brilliant and unfamiliar, it threatens to illuminate all we thought we knew. Yet this knowledge comes with a sacred demand. It calls not for passive acceptance, but for active participation in an ancient struggle that has always been waged not on battlefields, but in the realm of human awareness itself. This is a lineage that stretches back through time, from Gnostic mystics concealing gospels in their robes, to Renaissance artists encoding alchemical secrets in their masterpieces, from 19th century occultists reviving Hermetic wisdom, to contemporary digital archivists liberating suppressed manuscripts. This underground current of truth-seeking has never been extinguished because it represents not conspiracy, but the inevitable resistance of living knowledge against systems that would render it static and controlled. By engaging with these ideas, you become part of this unbroken chain. The question is no longer whether you will encounter these truths, but how you will allow them to transform you and what role you will play in their unfolding story. The true initiation into this mystery requires no breaking of seals or trespassing in forbidden archives. It begins in the quiet moments of everyday choice, when you select a book from the margins rather than the mainstream, when you entertain questions that challenge official narratives, when you stand before ancient ruins and dare to imagine hands more skilled than ours shaping stones we still cannot replicate. The alchemists of old sought the magnum opus, the transformation of base matter into gold. Our great work today is the alchemy of perception, the transmutation of inherited dogma into direct knowing. This is the real threat these texts pose to institutions. Not that they offended God, but that they rendered human intermediaries obsolete. We find ourselves in the dawn of a new renaissance, not of art and sculpture this time, but of reclaimed memory and liberated knowledge. Our printing press is the digital realm, our polymaths are independent researchers working outside institutional constraints, and our revolution is the quiet resurgence of wisdom traditions too vital to remain buried. Your participation in this awakening need not be dramatic, but it must be intentional. Become a living archive by preserving what powerful systems would have us forget. Cultivate the heretic's mind by entertaining forbidden thoughts as legitimate possibilities. Most importantly, work to build alternative systems of knowledge sharing that cannot be controlled or censored. The locked libraries of the Vatican stand as metaphor for all guarded truth, but every lock declares the value of what it protects. Consider this an invitation to become part of that most sacred tradition, the gentle thieves of fire, those who dare to bring illumination back to a world grown accustomed to shadows. These texts were never meant to remain hidden forever. They were simply waiting for an age when enough awakened minds could receive them without being destroyed by them. That age has come. The final chapter of this story remains unwritten, not because it lies in some sealed vault, but because it waits to be inscribed by your choices, your courage, and your willingness to bear the light forward.